Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Nucleus Shortcuts. I'm your host, Adam Dudley from the marketing team here. And our topic today is the weaknesses of managing vulnerabilities with a SIEM. And this is of a particular interest to me because recently I was at the Black Hat conference with a number of colleagues. I talked to several analysts and engineers that are still doing VM in a SIEM. And I really felt like they were just doing it because they were used to that way of doing things, and they weren't really thinking of or even aware that there might be a much better way to do things out there. So our guest is Jeff Gouge, and he's our CISO here at Nucleus, oversees information security and risk management programs for us, really making sure that our company and our customers' data is secure. Very important. Now, before Nucleus, he was with the University of North Florida in his hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, for nearly 10 years. When he was there, he significantly increased the scope and value of the security program and more than doubled the size of the original security team. And interestingly, he's like me. He's a rarity and a native Floridian. And you won't meet many of us in your lifetime. So, Jeff, is there anything I missed or left out in the intro that you'd like to mention?
Oh man. So I know everybody watching is just wondering what was different. What was different about these two great looking men. But Adam gave away the secret, right? The secret is that native Floridian Grillo. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate you having me on. Excited to be here and talk about a little bit of what I do in two of the small sectors of security and some of the tools in there as well. So like many IT security professionals, my experience is very diverse. It covers many topics. For many years, I was in QA, development, system administration, database administration, and even support before moving over to IT security. And having dabbled in that many fields gave me a good foundation, which helps me make good security decisions with both the company and the user in mind.
Fantastic. Thanks for following up with that. And so, Jeff, there are definitely some key differences between Nucleus and a SIEM. I mean, actually, now that I understand it, there are actually really big differences. And maybe we should kick things off with a discussion of those differences so we can kind of start to build a picture for the folks watching at home. How's that sound?
Yeah, no, that sounds great to me.
Right.
So for me, I have experience with both tools here at Nucleus. I use both tools. Potato, you're calling it SIEM, I call it a SIEM. Some people actually shorten it SEM, Security Event Management System. There's different ways and acronyms around the space, but the tool for me, I'll keep saying SIEM just because for years I've called it that way, but call it however you like as well. So like many things, let's start with some definitions. SIEM is an acronym, and in the way that we're pronouncing it is with an I in it, right? SIEM, which stands for Security Information and Events Management System. A SIEM provides basically real-time alerts by collecting logs from various systems and then parsing them into an easily searchable database, which will provide easier analysis and then alerts from multiple log sources, right? So a good example is, here at Nucleus in our cloud, we have many servers, but what I can do is I can write, one rule that says if anybody logs in with root once, and it applies to all of those servers, but I don't have to do that, and write and put things on each of those servers. So they are a great tool for people like me in security and for compliance reporting of incidents. And keep that word there bolded, right? Incidents is what a SIEM is about, right? Logs and incidents, tracking incidents. Many logs that enter a SIEM are not actionable by themselves. For example, we'll get into a few of those examples later. But Windows event logs is a good example. Just because I logged in doesn't mean that it's an incident, right? It could be a totally legitimate event.
Right.
They usually require correlation and some type of investigation to build a full story. Let's partner that, and next to Nucleus, there's no clear definition for Nucleus, but for as far as definitions go, Nucleus is for vulnerability and risk management, right? We're a platform around that. What we are designed to help you with is vulnerability management. So we centralize vulnerabilities. We're going to talk about vulnerabilities and keep that bold from many scanner tools of different types while tracking remediation status. We combine risk data from other sources to give an organization a true prioritized risk instead of just believing whatever the scanner is outputting. And we also collect data from multiple systems, but we are focused, like I said, on vulnerabilities, keyword vulnerability data, not incident data. So that's really the key difference. And I bolded those because that's different on the type of data being ingested as well as the primary focus of what each tool is.
Right, right. And I just realized I think I should make sure we are clear about this in this discussion, in that we, the company Nucleus, literally use Nucleus for our own vulnerability management program. And so I think that's very important to mention, that we drink deeply of the Kool-Aid. And
Yeah, you'll see that in the demo here later. I'm not going to show you our own
yeah,
vulnerabilities, of course. I'll show you the demo, but no,
right.
we use it every day here as well.
Right, right. So what I'm hearing, Jeff, is essentially a SIEM or a SIEM. I've been calling it SIEM for some reason.
Okay, you keep going.
It takes in data from system logs like applications, network devices, cloud infrastructure, and it puts that in one place so you can do your investigations on potential incidents. And then it also pulls in data for compliance reporting that can be helpful for that. Nucleus is a vastly more, or it's maybe not a more specialized tool, but it's specialized for the particular thing it does, which is in ingesting vulnerability and asset data, correlating that, and then providing additional tools that help with other processes. And we know there are many involved in managing vulnerabilities overall, like prioritization, as you mentioned, for example. Is that a pretty good summary?
Man, you got it. You're on it.
Cool. So Jeff, can you give us some more like real world examples of the weaknesses of using a SIEM as opposed to a tool like Nucleus to manage vulnerabilities, maybe even something from your own past experience?
Yeah, no problem. And I'll start with some of the comparisons, I would say, and just a few different topics, right, that I've written down of topics that we could talk about with differences.
Sure.
But put easily, a SIEM isn't designed to track vulnerabilities over time, right? It'll keep ingesting vulnerabilities that you send it from your scanners, but it's not really designed to track that over time. It's good at outputting those logs and maybe showing you a dashboard. But Nucleus is specifically built to track and manage vulnerabilities. So some of the differences, right? We talked about this a few times, the purpose and what's displayed, how it's displayed. Nucleus, on one hand, collects vulnerabilities. So we track things like history, metadata like active or inactive, who they're assigned to in different teams or different parts of your organization, resolutions, what scanners they came from, priorities, trends that you see with them, counts, all of those type of things. Some of those you can get from a SIEM if you just did the raw logs from them as well. But a SIEM, their purpose is collect raw logs, right? Collect those raw logs,
Right.
parse them, put them in an easily searchable, usually elastic type database that you can do to parse and correlate data. And that's really what they're designed and purpose for. Another key difference is tracking. Like I mentioned here, tracking on a SIEM side, you're tracking incidents and cases for the most part. You can also track some logs, but for the most part, you're not tracking, vulnerabilities. You can with some add-ons and some SIEMs. I know there's some dashboards that they'll show you a dashboard of how many you have, but that doesn't really go into the full tracking from, start to resolution. And then what happens if they come back?
Right.
Is that history still there? Whereas Nucleus, we track and manage vulnerabilities as well as assessments, by the way. Another thing to point out here is we're not only just, vulnerabilities, but also like third-party assessments. So for example, we get pen tested every quarter, and we actually track those using the Nucleus tool. So we can actually track and manage those assessments, manually input what, for example, what third parties are giving us in reports. And then we can actually track those from, our start to our completion as well. Whereas a SIEM's not really designed to do that.
Yeah.
Another thing, this is asset tracking. This is a term that it doesn't really, you don't want it to replace your asset management system if you have one, but if you don't have one, Nucleus can help there, right? It can be your starter asset management system. And I'll actually show you one of those pages here in a minute, because as we're collecting that data, we now have a good look at exactly what types of assets you have, and a lot of data about them, which we actually put into our own database, so you could search those as well. Like last seen, we can combine the data from all the servers, right? So you have a defender scan from your endpoint, you have an application scan, you have a web application scan. Well, it will actually correlate all those, put them all into the same asset. And that combined data is very key, very big. Software listings as well. So your scanners will output these as well, but all of the software used on those. But if you only looked at one scanner, you might not see it all because one scanner is picking up a list of software and the other scanner is picking up B, and security certificates like that. Whereas asset tracking on a SIEM side, Yeah, from a list of logs and maybe from a dashboard, you can get a good list of what your assets are. But that, like, going back to tracking and history, it's just not going to be there in a SIM. It's not really designed to do that. A few different small wins as well. Ticketing integrations from Nucleus side. We actually, and I actually do this in here, we can automate and bi-directionally do ticketing integrations. So whereas on a SIM side, usually you just, if an alert comes, so a log comes in, it matches one of your alerts that you have written, that creates a ticket. End of story. Now your work's now in the ticket.
Right.
From the Nucleus side, you can actually manage that ticket within the tool and actually do things to update that ticket from within the tool automatically or manually from the tool.
Right.
Which is actually, it's not a small win, but it's a big win there
Yeah.
too.
And if I could interrupt, I mean, this
No, go ahead.
helps. This helps significantly where you have a security team, maybe a vulnerability management team, and then they're interacting with a development team, for example. Now, the developers are used to working in Jira, right? So,
Yeah.
using the Jira integration with Nucleus, then the security team can effectively collaborate with the development team because they can just create Jira tickets for security bugs,
Yep.
push those out to Jira, and now those tickets are available to the developers. When the developers update them, then the security team can see, what the status is that the developer updated. So
Yeah, no, you're dead
yeah.
on. And that's a little bit, I'm going to reference this in a few different spots, but kind of
Hmm.
like you've seen from Dave's blogs, also at Nucleus here, and from his
Right.
shortcuts, a few of the things that's speaking their language, right?
Right.
We're starting to try to speak their language. So we
Yeah.
write features to try to speak the other, department's languages. So that's a great example.
Nice.
Another big win, also from one of Dave's most recent blogs, actually, I think it came out yesterday,
Yeah.
is risk scores, right? We're
Hmm.
correlating risk and combining risk from many different sources. You could do recorded future. We have the future Mandiant, other stores coming out. You could take risk from all your scanners and combine them in and do it. To whereas you're not relying on the risk of what each scanner is giving you as far as a risk score is of like just the CVE, right? We're
Right.
combining that with some overall better data, and it's just more knowledge around the topic. Whereas a SIM, same thing. It's going to be whatever it's coming in. Now, risk can also be adjusted in a SIM, and I know that. For example, on our SIM, if it came from a production server, it bumps the risk up a little bit. It goes from maybe a low to a medium or a medium to a high.
Yeah.
But you're not able to really combine what's happening in the wild. There are some vulnerability intelligence feeds that come with it as well. Most of those are usually centered around alert management. So a little different there as well. And then the last topic, which I'm going to go into in a second, here's automation.
Hmm.
Yes, you can collect the logs coming in from a SIM, but there isn't any way to change that data for the most part once it's parsed and comes into the system, right? It's a log. The one of the key wins in compliance side for a SIM is that your logs aren't changing. So it's not designed to change because you don't want to change what actually happened, right? As far as the
Right.
log. So that's actually would break one of its key features. Whereas on Nucleus, we have automated processing rules, right? If you want to come in and assign a different prioritization than what came in, you could do that. If you want to
Right.
assign it to a different team, like the development team, you can
Yeah.
do that, right? You can actually come through and change, process. You can also ignore things as they come in. Hey, we know about TLS 1.0.
Sure.
Right now, it's not a priority. We're going to ignore those, right?
Yep.
So lots of key wins there that we have going on. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Sure.
And we're going to start here with just a little overview. This is a little snippet from one of our demo instances. This is a logarithm SIM. So if you're a logarithm customer, you'll notice this. But Splunk, I'll mention all kinds of tools. There's a lot of SIMs, but they're all going to be very similar, right? So this is an example output of what a tenable connection would be like in a SIM, right? So what you would get is you had a raw log come in,
Yep.
and that raw log contained basically a one line, sometimes multi-line of data. And in there, you'll get certain things, like you'll get the asset, you'll get a list of CVEs, and then a prioritization based on what that CVE is and what the scanner thought. And that's all you'll get, right? So you'll get that in a line format. And then, of course, from this data point of a SIM, you can display a nice little graph, and you could see that, a production server had 2 vulnerabilities and the test server had 10, for example. And you could see that in a chart. You could see, maybe this number. So like this vulnerability is affected on every instance. Well, you could see that on a dashboard, which is pretty cool, but that's about the limitations of the SIM. And now you can alert on this as well. Now I know in other SIMs like Splunk, there are, add-ins for different scanner tools. but they're not designed to bring them all in, right? They're usually designed for each of the scanner tools, and they'll
Right.
give you some better dashboarding, but that's really not its purpose. So if I hide this and go right behind it, perfect. We are running here, and now we're going to switch over and go to Nucleus. Here at Nucleus here, I'm going to start with a few different pages, and I just want to talk about a few different, big wins here. So I'm going to start, the page I started out here is, I'm within our test dummy organization, Acme, right? And in here, we have a bunch of dummy data, but this is the asset management page. And I talked about this earlier, right? Asset management being, this could help manage your assets and see them all in one spot. Here's a
Right.
perfect example, right? Here's where all your assets are. It's even grouped them. You see you have 80 assets. You can see where they're coming from. With a real quick, with one view, you can actually see from all of your scanners that you have out there, what is your scan coverage, right? Each of your tools will give you your scan coverage for what it thinks it's finding. But what's
Sure.
your true scan coverage, right? And if you combine this data with a true asset management system, then you'll get, you'll find your gaps with scan coverage, right? Acme has terrible scan coverage, right?
Right.
85% of the company here, they are not scanning.
That's a
So
problem.
it's a problem. There's a gap, right? Boom, action right there. Also on this page here, a few things we want to point out is the types. So we're not just worried about hosts or what the IP is. We're actually going to also do things like containers, applications. Those type of things are all tracked in here, and they're tracked differently because they are different, right? Whereas in
Right.
a SIEM, it's just going to be a name. They're not going to be able to track those differently. Same thing with resources and attributes, right? So I'm not sure. I don't think we have one of those in here as an example, but say you had a cloud host like an AWS host. With our connector, you can actually pull all of the asset information and now get all of that detailed metadata about that asset directly here in Nucleus and can actually search for that, right?
Right.
So that's another big win. So like I said, there's a lot of big things that you can see from this. Here's your prioritized risk score, right? Based on the number of vulnerabilities, the types of vulnerabilities, whether or not it's business critical. There's a few other things that we can use here to combine risk. Whether or not this asset itself is external, right? Is this thing publicly accessible? That's going to increase its risk, right? And then combining that data with, like I said, those third-party feeds is going to give you a more accurate risk score, which will help with prioritization at your company. Last seen date is another big thing here. This will tell you when there's issues with scans, right? Why did all of a sudden the web goat stop talking to us in May, right? Did something, was there a change as part of change management that happened that now is affecting our scanning, right? These
Sure.
are all things that a security team are massive wins for because you can use this and it's very, very actionable. Next page I'm going to jump to is just active vulnerabilities from this page. So lots to digest here as well, but like once again, counting the number of unique instances of a vulnerability versus the true number, right? A SIEM is going to very easily output the number of times it appeared on an asset, but
Right.
not very easily give you the unique number of times for each unique CVE, right? The sources of where they're coming from. You might see this on here, but combining this source with exploitability. I talked about this a minute ago. Is this even exploitable? Some more details on the status, right? We can actually track the status right here and go, okay, in between scan cycles, I've mitigated this. So I can actually sit here and say, you know what? We're going to mitigate this. And we're going to say, it's no longer in process with my patch team. They've actually mitigated it. So I'm going to mark it as mitigated. And boom, on the fly, it's going to update to mitigated, right? Which is pretty cool. And then
Right.
next
And
scan cycle, it's going to come
right.
through and update that. Go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
Yeah. And so that status will persist in Nucleus because Nucleus is considered the source of truth for the data. And so even if a scan comes in with different information, it'll remain as mitigated, correct?
Correct. That's
Yep.
correct.
Right.
Yep. So now it might tell you something differently or be here, but if it's not or not, if it is mitigated, then it's resolved, and it's no longer in your active list anymore.
Yep.
Right? It'll now go down to resolved. And then the last thing I want to talk about, because this is key to Nucleus and really where we're a massive differentiator, and that's in all of these automations. I'm not going to go into all of them. You can do a demo with us if you want to see more about all of them, but I'll tease a little bit on the vulnerability processing rules here. And I'm not going to even go into it, but I'm just going to stop here, right? And just kind of give the audience a little bit of an example of, as data comes in, we can actually automate from there, right? We can set due dates, right? Critical vulnerabilities according to our vulnerability management plan must be addressed within 7 days. Well, boom, we can set a due date of 7 days as critical vulnerabilities come in. We can assign them to the correct patch teams, to where now it took a team of a lot of people to assign this out before and work with different teams to put them in Jira, like you talked about earlier, or other tools. Now we could do this automatically. We know if this is a type of vulnerability that, we don't see as that important, but we know scanners see it as a medium vulnerability. We can, set its severity down if we wanted to, or up, right? If we really
Right.
wanted to focus on something. And then comments, right? I talked about tracking. You can literally track vulnerabilities and write comments on them as they go. So you can see a full history of it, and it's all right there in one spot.
Yep.
And, comments is a big deal if you're working with multiple teams, for sure.
Sure. And that's a
So-
full record. That's a full record that persists over time, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
no, exactly. And so, I mean, that's about it for the demo that I wanted to show. Going in and kind of talking high level real quick again, just wanted to point up like the types of logs that you would get, right? A SIM, you're going to ingest logs from everywhere. You're going to ingest them from your workstations, from your employees that you have. You're going to ingest them from your IPS, your IDS, your firewall, your application logs out cloud and on premise, because I bet you have both now. Your proxy, your antivirus logs, directory logs, Active Directory logs. Those are all the types of logs that are designed to go in a SIM, right? To design so that you have non-repudiation when, you have an attacker come in. Well, how do you know that that's the log? How do you know they didn't update the log and change the log? Well, if you're putting that into a SIM, then you have that, right? Your SIM will tell you what actually happened. Nucleus, on the other hand, vulnerability data, right? We're taking scanner data and asset data, vulnerability data, exploit data. We're taking all of that in, and another thing that you're not going to get from a SIM, you saw that from ours, you're not going to see how to resolve it, right? What's the resolution?
Right.
What are the, what does the CVE say of how to even fix this? Well, in Nucleus, you can get at least a snippet or more information on where you can go to find that. In a SIM, it's not usually going to be there, right? It's not designed for that. So just a quick overview.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. That's all very clear, and it's even more clear to me how Nucleus is just a much more specialized tool for doing a specialized job, right? I mean, vulnerability management, just like analyzing SIM data. These are very specialized activities, and it makes sense to have a specialized tool to do specialized activities. So, what I'm really taking away from all that is Nucleus is for managing vulnerability data. SIM is not, possibly was never intended to be, right? It really sounds like it was not. But maybe folks at some point, they started using a SIM to do VM because, someone came and said, okay, we got to do VM. You have to do VM. And, maybe Nucleus wasn't around yet, or tools like Nucleus didn't even exist yet. So I have to assume that anybody still using a SIM for managing vulnerabilities or considering it, there's a lot of setup and customization involved to even get a SIM to work for this purpose. I mean, I can
There's
just
a lot of setup
imagine.
involved in general just to get it working.
Yeah, in general.
I mean, security person, that.
Yeah, and I've seen our SIM and seen his demo. It doesn't seem like a very simple application. It's pretty complex. So, using the SIM is clearly not going to be as efficient or effective as managing vulns with Nucleus. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So just wanted to finish up, Jeff, with, what are some big wins that people could instantly get when they switch over to a SIM, from a SIM to using Nucleus, or just using Nucleus in general?
Sure. Yeah. A little summary. I've said them all over the place, so let's kind of go over them, right?
Yeah.
Nucleus can be an automation engine and a true source of vulnerability data. That's going to be different from a SIM, which you'd have to do a little bit of work and have some people to pull all that out to see what's ingesting and get the latest logs, right? Tracking vulnerabilities and being able to easily see all assets affected, the source, when they were last seen, the number of assets. Those are all big wins. A SIM can output vulnerability data from the scanner, but it would need some type of middleware or controller to control and track that flow. History of a vulnerability, not easily found in a SIM. We talked about that in a few ways. SIMs do not have vulnerability processing. We talked about all the different ways of which we can do vulnerability processing. That's going to be, Nucleus wins there. The ticketing integrations, bidirectional and Nucleus, whereas a SIM usually just alerting. And then reporting of vulnerabilities. Nucleus is around vulnerability management, so it leads to say that it's going to be a lot better at reporting, and the reports are very good in there than what you would have from a SIEM report.
Fantastic. Well, that's a nice summary. I think we'll leave it at that, and that's a wrap for this episode of Nucleus Shortcuts. Jeff, thanks very much for joining us today. And we'll share some links in the show notes in case anybody's interested in learning more about Nucleus and checking out our various resources that we mentioned throughout the talk today. So thanks again, Jeff, and we'll see you next time on Nucleus Shortcuts.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Adam.
See ya.